It seemed as if the dark walls of my father's office were slowly, almost ominously, closing in around me, as if the very air in that space was saturated with something viscous, alien, and I, a grown woman, suddenly felt cramped and uncomfortable again as in childhood, when I hid in the corner of this room, afraid to say something wrong, frightened by his gaze, burning and demanding. Everything in this room smelled of power. Thick, heavy, enveloping, smelled of expensive tobacco, antique leather bindings, ebony wood, and the discreet cologne that my father used all his life. And now this smell seemed to have eaten into the walls, into the books, into the polished armrests of the chairs, and perhaps into the very essence of this room, which had become a temple of his ambitions and undivided control. He sat behind his massive desk, framed by a green-shaded desk lamp and an army of stationery, like a general who had given all his orders and was now merely overseeing their execution. When he signed the documents, he did so with a quick, almost irritated movement of his hand, and the scratch of his expensive fountain pen. A sharp, cold metallic melody pierced the room with unexpected vividness, as if he were not simply signing papers but scribbling my destiny, not the smooth, thick paper. "Here," he said, pushing a neat stack of papers toward me, not looking me in the eye, as if everything had already been decided, and there was no drama or hesitation left in it. "It's all done. The entire $5 million in the trust fund will go to Teresa." He said it so matter-of-factly, so coolly, as if he were talking about a paid-off loan or a change of insurance company, and something inside me snapped, and not from the amount, not from the money, but from how easily and casually I was written out of the family formula. As if I were a random error in the equation. Just like that, I was erased from memory. "My name is Anna Smith. I am 30 years old, and today, my family officially decided that I am no longer one of them." And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. I heard Teresa's breathing. She stood by the window, slightly turned away, her shoulder tense, her back straight, her chin slightly raised, and although she tried to hide her expression, I saw how a thin, almost invisible smirk played on her lips, how joy trembled in the corners of her eyes, the joy of victory, veiled by polite silence. She said nothing, but her silence was louder than words. "You lost, sister. I won as always." Behind me in the big leather chair my mother sighed, and it wasn't just a sigh, it was something rehearsed, as if she had been rehearsing this moment in her head many times, preparing for it, knowing in advance what to say, how to sit, how to look at me. "If you'd taken a more traditional path, Anna, if you'd just gone to law school like Teresa, if you just tried your best," she said softly, as if from afar, and I felt 1,000 tiny pricks growing under my skin like 100 wasps, stinging me at once. "I tried my best," I said quietly, evenly, without hysteria, without shaking, because there was no need to anymore, because I knew they wouldn't believe me. And not because I was lying, but because my truth was incomprehensible to them, alien, out of place in their world. My father looked up from his papers and at me with an expression I'd known since childhood. Frustration tinged with something like bitterness. "Fiddling around with computers in your little apartment isn't hard work," he said. His voice like glass on marble. He stood up abruptly, and his chair slid back with a dull scrape. "Your sister's a partner at Williams & Edwards at 33, and you? You build websites for coffee shops and dog groomers. You live in a shoebox in the city. That's not the future, it's a hobby." I could have stopped him right there. I could have fucking punched him in the face and sent him slumping back into his expensive chair. I could have told him about the company I'd built from scratch, how I'd grown it from nothing, a single laptop, and a few sleepless nights, into a financial technology platform that was now slowly but surely making its way into the heart of Silicon Valley. I could tell him that our algorithm helps everyday people, like his gardener, like his secretary, like my friend's mom, make smart investment decisions, that no other product on the market does what we do. I could have told him about the meeting tomorrow, about the same investors who were willing to invest tens of millions because they believed in us, because they had already valued us at $450 million after closing our Series A. But I didn't, because I knew it didn't matter. In their world, a world where success smelled of cigars and was tailored to the shoulders, success looked different. In their world, a corner office and a gold plaque on the door said more than any investment or innovation. You're right about the end of your name, I said quietly, standing up, my fingers brushing the cool bronze arm of my chair as if saying goodbye. I'm not who you thought I was. Teresa deserves money, I added, and she winced so subtly that perhaps no one but me noticed. For one brief, painfully sharp moment, I saw the sister she once was. Not the partner, not the winner, but the girl who snuck into my room at night with cookies when I had nightmares, the one who helped me with algebra problems and whispered, "You're the smartest, Anna, you just have to believe it." Anna, she began. But I held up my hand, cutting her off. It's okay, Teresa. Really, congratulations on your partnership. You deserve it. When I turned to leave, my steps were quiet but firm. And then my mother called out to me, her voice almost gentle, almost real. Would you at least like to join us for dinner? Your father has made reservations at Le Bernardin to celebrate. I paused in the doorway, lingering for a moment, allowing myself one last look back at that achingly familiar office where so many scenes of my life had passed, but none of them were entirely mine. I looked at the walls, every inch of which was covered with evidence of other people's victories. Law degrees in expensive frames, awards for merit, photographs from judgeships, portraits of my father and Teresa smiling into the camera. As if their success had been planned and assured, not a single photograph of me, no hint that I was part of this story, as if my existence were an accident, a mistake that had been carefully forgotten and erased. I have an appointment, I said simply, not wanting to go into an explanation that would make no sense. But enjoy your dinner. I nodded and, without looking back, walked out into the cool of the summer evening. The drive back to the city was silent. Not the kind of silence that crushes and scares, but the kind that lulls and liberates, the hum of the engine mixing with the rhythm of thoughts, each echoing inside. As I sat behind the wheel, staring at the dark ribbon of the road, I was surprised to realize that I didn't feel angry. I wasn't even sad, and that was strange because it felt like I just lost something significant, something that many people consider a measure of love, trust, belonging. But all I felt was a sense of final clarity. It wasn't money I'd lost. I had money now, and more than I'd ever imagined. No, what hurt most was that even after everything I'd built, after all the sleepless nights, all the decisions, all the risks, it wasn't enough. It was never enough for them, for my family. When I got back to my apartment, simple and cramped, but familiar to the last rustle, my phone vibrated. The name Sophia, my CTO, my ally, the one who had walked beside me from the start, appeared on the screen. Meeting with venture capitalist rescheduled for the morning. She wrote, "Are you ready?" I stared at the screen for a second and then slowly, with real feeling, I smiled. I was more than ready. Let's change the rules of the game, I said, because while my family may have written me out of their story, the world hadn't even begun to read my chapter yet, and I knew they would see me, everyone, when I finally walked into my apartment, which my father had just so condescendingly mocked as a shoebox. I was relieved to kick off my heels, symbols of a world I never fit into, and head straight for my small but incredibly important home office. In the dim light, the walls glowed softly blue from monitors updating data in real time. Rows of numbers and graphs, charts, pop-up windows displaying the results of our latest user interface test. I stood frozen, watching the numbers scroll across the screens, and each one was proof that what we had created didn't just work. It was revolutionary. Computer games, as my father had dismissively called them, the things he had laughed at as frivolities, had become something real, powerful, unprecedented. We had built ATNA, adaptive trading geometry and neural analytics, a system that could do what seemed impossible: predict the stock market with an accuracy that no human, no trader could match. It analyzed millions of data points in seconds, picking out invisible connections, behavioral patterns, microchanges that preceded booms and busts from the noise. It wasn't just technology, it was a new era. And then my phone vibrated again. I picked it up, and a name appeared on the screen that I honestly didn't expect to see so soon: Teresa. The message was short, written with an obvious attempt at gentleness. "Sorry about your dad, you know what he's like. Trust funds don't mean anything anyway, right? You're good with your computer." I stared at the words, and though they were technically an expression of concern, I felt that same familiar cold sting. as if written between the lines. You play, we live for real. Even her attempt to support me felt like another subtle reminder of how she viewed my journey as child's play. A strange, unrealistic pursuit. Computer stuff. As if this weren't changing the landscape of the entire global financial system. I paused for a moment, combed my hair into a ponytail with my fingers, took a deep breath, and calmly typed a reply. Thank you, Teresa. Enjoy your dinner. I turned my attention back to preparing for the investor meeting tomorrow. A presentation opened on the screen in front of me, and every slide, from the financial models to the technology demo, was imbued with our belief in the product and supported by real data. The results of the beta testing exceeded all expectations. ATNA outperformed traditional algorithms by 40%, which in this field was not just a noticeable improvement, it was a breakthrough. Rumors were already starting to spread, we could feel it. Some of the largest banks and financial groups, the ones that usually keep their distance, were already cautiously testing the waters, contacting through third parties, hinting at a desire to get early access. At that moment, a quiet ringing sounded in the room, one of the monitors flickered, and I saw an incoming video call. Sophia. Her face appeared on the screen, and, although she was usually the personification of calm confidence, today there was something new in her gaze, some kind of tension that even her usual half-smiling tone did not hide. Hello, she said. How is your family? I exhaled, as if releasing everything that had accumulated over the day, ran a hand through my hair, and with a slight grin replied. As expected, Dad gave the trust fund to Teresa. They were probably celebrating at Le Bernardin right now, sitting at their perfectly laid table in the private room, sipping champagne from delicate glasses and pretending that this evening was simply a family tradition, and not the triumph of one child and the silent exile of another. Sophia, watching my expression, tilted her head slightly as if she were reading my thoughts, and shook her head with a slight, almost sympathetic smile. Their loss, she said quietly, then raised an eyebrow, and her voice took on the familiar determination of, are you ready to show those venture capitalists what real success looks like tomorrow? I nodded and wasted no time in pulling up another screen, where the latest test results had just loaded, the numbers coursing through my veins like blood, proving the viability of our system. To be honest, as the graphs were updating, I was secretly thinking about something else entirely. What if we don't take the venture capital money? Sophia blinked, not immediately understanding what I meant. Wait, what? She asked, and I saw a mixture of surprise and concern cross her face. Anna, we're talking about a $21 million investment at a valuation of $450 million. This isn't just a chance, it's a leap. I sat up slowly, placing my palms on the edge of the table, and felt confidence building inside me, calm and solid as internal cement. That's the problem, I said. It's small-minded thinking. Look at these results. We're not catching up with the market. We're ahead of it. We could go public in a year. If we take their money now, we'll give up control, but if we wait, we can build something big on our own terms. Sophia paused, a shadow of doubt flashed in her eyes, but then it gave way to something else. The realization that we were standing on something much bigger than just a successful startup. And then her lips slowly stretched into a smile, a real wide one, the kind that starts in the eyes. You don't want a company, you want an empire, she said with respect in her voice. I smiled too, shaking my head slightly. Not just an empire, I answered quietly. I want to build something that even my father can't ignore, something that will attract the attention of the entire financial world, even those who still don't believe that I'm capable of anything serious at all. Sophia laughed, her laugh ringing out, as if the tension of the last few hours had crystallized. You know he's a corporate lawyer, right? If this technology is so groundbreaking, shouldn't he have heard of it by now? I shook my head lightly without anger. Sophia, this man still uses a BlackBerry. He thinks programming is something they teach you at the community center on weekends. He's never even asked me what I really do. He's never asked what we're building, and now it's too late. Sophia nodded, her expression serious. Well, she said, lifting her chin slightly. His loss, so what's the plan? Cancel tomorrow's presentation. I looked at her and a spark went off in my head. No, I said, and I could already hear the idea taking shape. We're going. But instead of asking for money, we're offering a partnership. We don't want their capital, we want access to their networks. If they open the right doors for us, we'll grow even faster on our terms. 5 months later, everything was different. I was standing in the center of our brand new office in the heart of Manhattan, a building whose glass walls reflected the sun and contained the future. The space was spacious, modern, and filled with soft natural light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the financial district. It was almost poetic. The skyscrapers that once ridiculed ideas like mine were now filled with people eager to see our technology launched. Our engineers were focused, almost silent, deep in the final stages of ATNA testing, and there was that special energy in the air that only comes when you're on the cusp of something truly great. Anna, Sophia called from across the room, her voice tinged with urgency but also with admiration. I walked over to her, a cup of coffee in hand, and peered over her shoulder at the screen. The latest simulation results were loading, and what I saw took the breath out of me. It was beyond all our predictions, beyond even the dreams we kept to ourselves, afraid to voice. Athena was no longer simply predicting market movements. It was beginning to recognize the very reasons for those movements before they were obvious to anyone else. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the running numbers and graphs, my heart beating faster, as if it already knew the answer. Is it true? I asked, squinting to make sure I was seeing correctly. Sophia nodded, her eyes ablaze, as if a flame had ignited inside her. Through triple-checking, Athena began to recognize patterns even in data that was once considered chaotic. Forum and social media posts, the subtext of news headlines, the subtle changes in algorithmic trading that typically escape the eyes of analysts. It predicted the Morgan Stanley merger announcement 3 days before it was published. If this were real-time trading, I whispered, staring at the numbers flashing on the screen, not believing they were real. If we were actually trading right now, we would have made billions, Sophia finished for me. Her voice not a statement but a reverent confession, as if she were delivering a sacred revelation. I ran my palm over my temple, feeling the skin throb beneath my fingers, still trying to fully comprehend the enormity of what we had just witnessed. This was not a lucky coincidence, not a fluke win, this was a result. Have we done this before? In the past? I asked, searching her face for confirmation. This is the best, she replied, quickly moving to another screen. And yes, we have done this before, it's all clean. Athena doesn't use inside information, all it does is connect the dots, publicly available. Only he does it so much better than any human being could. At that moment my phone vibrated, and when I glanced at the screen, the name that appeared made me hold my breath for a second. Teresa. Hi sis, she wrote. My parents have been worried for a while, Dad says. Your old number isn't working. Is everything okay? I couldn't help but smile, though it wasn't a smile of joy or malice, just a warm, slightly bitter irony. Of course, the number wasn't working. We'd left the tiny apartment he'd called a box months ago. Our company now occupied an entire floor of a brand new $55 million office tower, a gleaming glass and steel building just 6 blocks from Wall Street. And yet, in my family's eyes, I must still be sitting on a stool in the corner, surrounded by wires, my laptop in my lap, as if the years had been wasted. I'm fine, just busy with work, I replied curtly, not feeling the need to explain. Immediately after sending the message, the phone lit up again. This time it was Jonathan, our head of legal. His voice was as calm as ever, but there was a special weight to his words. The SEC is confirmed for next week. They're interested in your compliance system, he said. I chuckled. Interested was an understatement. As soon as word of our system, an artificial intelligence that could not only predict the market but act ahead of it, had leaked out, the SEC had been begging for a meeting. They wanted to be the first to figure out what Athena was before it upended the financial world, and frankly, it was a smart move, a rare display of foresight on the part of regulators. Before I could process this thought, the intercom at reception crackled to life and the familiar voice of Ms. Smith, our assistant, always collected and precise, came through the receiver. Anna, Mr. Williams is here to see you. He says he's from Williams & Edwards. My heart skipped a beat. Williams and Edwards, the name that was inseparable from Teresa, her world, her power, her pinnacle. Let him in, I said, simultaneously straightening my jacket and preparing myself internally, knowing exactly that a new door was about to open and that I needed to be ready. Mason Williams walked into the room, a senior partner, a man my father trusted without hesitation, a representative of the old school, confident in himself and his place in the world, with a perfectly tailored suit, bleached temples and an expression on his face that usually ignored people like me. Miss Smith. He greeted me with a restrained but respectful handshake. Thank you for taking the time to meet me. I hope you'll forgive my unexpected visit. I nodded and gestured to the chair across from him, maintaining the calm that came with years of training. Of course, I said. I'm curious, how did you even know about Athena? He smiled, and that smile had it all: charm, experience, negotiation. Let's just say our clients in the financial world are very interested in your work. They've asked us to consider possible partnerships. I raised an eyebrow, watching his reaction with interest. Does my sister know you're here? His smile froze for a moment, and a hint of confusion crossed his gaze. Teresa? No, this is a confidential visit, although I admit I was surprised to learn that you were her sister. She never mentioned. I inclined my head slightly and allowed myself a soft, ironic smile. Let me guess, she never told you she had a sister who plays computers? He had the tact to look a little embarrassed, looking away slightly. She doesn't talk about you much at all. I wasn't surprised. It wasn't news. She doesn't talk about me much at all, I repeated calmly, and there was no offense or desire to sting in this phrase. Just a fact accepted and digested many years ago. Before the silence in the room could fill with awkwardness, Sophia poked her head in the door with a tablet in her hands. Her eyes were shining with excitement, and I already understood from her expression that something important was about to happen. Anna, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Goldman Sachs is here for their presentation, Sophia said, and I heard more than just a businesslike tone in her voice but a subtle, slightly mocking intonation, as if she were enjoying watching the past knock on my door at the very moment when the future was already laid out on the table in front of me. I looked at Mason Williams, and as soon as the name Goldman Sachs sounded, I saw something change in his eyes. In that same second, his expression became more wary, even respectful. I almost physically felt how a recalculation was taking place in his head. My value, my reputation, my capabilities, even my outfit. Everything that he considered superficial or insignificant a minute ago suddenly became significant, important, burdened with potential. I rose from the table slowly and calmly, with that inner confidence that comes not from pride but from the deep knowledge that you are no longer asking, explaining, proving. Mr. Williams, I said, carefully pushing back my chair and standing up straight. I appreciate your visit, I really do, but I have another meeting to attend. If your firm is truly interested in future negotiations, please contact our lawyers. He immediately jumped up, smoothing his jacket slightly and regaining his expression of professional calm. Of course, but Smith, please know that we can offer you whatever Goldman offers. Williams and Edwards represents half the financial giants in this city. We know people, we open doors. I nodded slightly, suppressing the grin that was already threatening to burst out. We will contact you. When he left, a thick, rich silence fell over the room, and I suddenly caught a taste in that moment, the taste of victory, but not over him, not over Teresa, not over my parents, but over my yesterday's self, over those moments when I doubted myself, when I almost believed that they were right. The same firm that once passed me by without even deigning to look at me was now coming to me, not asking but almost begging, and not just knocking, competing. We were no longer just on the radar, we were the radar itself. And that was only the beginning. When I walked into my office, the environment did not change, but I felt how something inside me had changed. This feeling, strange and almost sacred, had nothing to do with money. Money was just a consequence, a byproduct of the real idea. Mr. Williams was wrong in thinking that it was about capital. It was about rewriting the rules of the game, on rethinking who has the right to sit at this table. I looked him straight in the eye before he left and said clearly, evenly, "This isn't about the money, Mr. Williams, this is about making a Difference? He didn't say anything, but I could see in his eyes that he understood. As the door closed, Sophia glanced at me with a mixture of mild irritation and outright amusement. "You enjoyed it, didn't you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow and crossing her arms over her chest as if testing me. "Maybe just a little," I admitted with a grin, and we both laughed. She leaned against the wall and said, "How long do you think it'll take him to tell Teresa all this? Considering her firm manages billions in investments." I shrugged, pulling out my phone. 10 minutes tops, I said. And right on cue my phone flickered, a new text from Teresa. "Anna, why didn't you tell me? Mason Williams just walked out of your office looking like he'd seen a ghost. What exactly are you working on?" I stared at the screen, not responding. There would be a time for explanations and questions and family drama. But not now. Right now we had more important things to do. Things that could change the financial world. We were preparing for a live demo of Athena for one of the biggest names in the industry. The Goldman Sachs team was already gathered in our conference room. 5 senior executives in tailored suits, trying to keep a straight face but clearly showing the excitement in their expressions. The fact that they had come here to our office, rather than calling us into their office, was a momentous occasion. It was a confession, and if we could get them on board, not as investors but as strategic partners, it would open the doors to every office on Wall Street, every conference room, where real decisions are made. I stepped forward to the center of the room, and feeling all eyes on me, I spoke confidently, my voice clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking around at them, "what you are about to see will change the way the market works forever, but first," I paused and held out my hand with a folder. "I need you to sign these non-disclosure agreements." There was a swirl of pens across paper, a rustle of pages, and a silence that already felt electric with the coming event. On the morning of our IPO, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of my new, perfectly tailored Chanel suit. It fit me like a glove, a silhouette that said without words, "I am here for a reason." Not that my parents would notice, of course. It could have been Armani or Gap. They wouldn't care. In their eyes, I might still be the girl who didn't want to go to law school, but I knew who I had become. The latest copy of the Wall Street Journal was on my desk, and on the front page was a headline I'd never even dreamed of reading. "ATNA is preparing for the biggest tech IPO of the year. The expected valuation, $900 million. My phone had been vibrating nonstop for days, as if I was suddenly remembered, as if the same people who had passed me by were now rushing to reassert their lost involvement, as if the reality they'd been caught up in had finally crashed into their world. First Teresa, her messages short, careful, almost guarded, as if she still didn't know exactly what she was feeling. Then my mother, whose words were full of confusion, apologies, but also something elusively tense, anxious, as if she were afraid to hear silence in response. And finally my father, his voice calling out in that same deep, authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. But now it sounded different. For the first time it was a question, not a statement. All their calls, all their messages went unanswered. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, simply because I knew now is not the time. In any case, they would all be at the IPO ceremony. The invitations had been sent out weeks ago. And this was my last word, official, public, with no chance to pretend that nothing had happened. "Are you ready?" A voice rang out from the door. I turned to see Sophia standing in the doorway, not in her usual cozy hoodie and jeans, but in a sharp, perfectly tailored business suit that only emphasized how far we had both come. "Born ready," I replied with a slight half-smile, picking up the folder of presentations. It was more than words. It was a state I entered consciously, like armor. "How are things at 8 this morning?" I asked as we walked together into the hallway, where work was already in full swing behind glass walls. "Like a dream," she replied, a glint in her eye. "Real-time forecasts with 98% accuracy. The trading floor is on fire. Everyone knows this is going to rock the market." I nodded, feeling that same vibration begin to hum inside me. Not anxiety but anticipation, like before the first chord of a symphony you wrote yourself. By the time we arrived at the New York Stock Exchange, the crowd had already gathered. Cameras were clicking from all sides, Reporters were standing in a line, shouting over each other, their voices echoing off the glass facades of the buildings like a harbinger of something really big. I caught snippets of their comments. The youngest female ever to take a company public? A new era in trading technology. AI company AT&A already has contracts with the biggest banks. It all sounded like something out of a movie, but this was my reality, my journey built line by line, code by code, sleepless night after sleepless night. Inside the exchange, the air was electric, not with fear, not with panic, but with anticipation of change. Our entire team was already gathered near the podium, their faces full of concentration and pride. The hall was filled with representatives of the largest banks and financial corporations. Their suits fit them like a second skin, and their eyes reflected cautious hope that they would see not just a product, but a breakthrough. And then in the front row I saw them, my family. My father sat motionless, his face a complex web of emotions that I had never seen in him before. Pride, regret, confusion, and something else, something that I hardly dared to call awe. My mother, shocked, kept wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, and I realized these were not just emotions. This was something that broke through the walls inside her, built up over the years. And Teresa, she just looked, not with reproach, not with envy, but with amazement, as if for the first time she saw in me not a younger sister, not someone who needed to be looked after or criticized, but a woman equal to herself, strong, real. Anna, my father said quietly as I passed, his voice full of something new. We had no idea. I stopped and looked him in the eye. No, you didn't know, I answered calmly, because you never asked. He wanted to say something, but before he could, the president of the exchange called me up to the stage, and the ceremony was about to begin. I walked up to the podium, and the room fell silent as if the building itself were holding its breath. I stood on this spot, high, symbolic, historic, and everything that had come before flashed through my mind. For years ago, I began, my voice confident, and even as it carried through the room, I was coding in a tiny apartment. People laughed. They said I was wasting my time playing with computers. They weren't seeing the big picture, but I wasn't playing, I was building the future. I paused and looked around the room, letting the words sink into the air, into the minds of those listening. Today, AT&A processes more market data in a second than Wall Street can analyze in a month. We've built something that doesn't just react to the market, it understands the market. I looked at my family, and my father's gaze was fixed on mine, not defiantly, not demandingly, but attentively. For the first time, recognition. I saw it now. He finally saw me. And this, I said, is just the beginning. Athena could predict market moves with near-perfect accuracy. It was legally compliant and operated within the highest ethical standards. But it wasn't just its technology that made it truly special. What made it truly special wasn't just its algorithms, or just its computing power, or even the fact that it predicted the world's markets with an accuracy previously thought impossible, but what it represented: power, the power of an idea, the power of intuition, the power of believing in your vision, even when no one else believed, when everyone laughed, turned away, said no, when doors slammed shut one after another, and even when that no came from the most familiar lips. The IPO ceremony went as such events should. Speeches, camera flashes, loud applause, dozens of handshakes, smiles, phrases like, "You have inspired us," and finally the ringing of the stock exchange bell, a ringing that echoed through the room, like a signal of a new beginning. But the real magic happened later, when the numbers on the large electronic board, high above the room, lit up. I froze along with everyone else. The room literally held its breath. The first numbers seemed too good to be true, and then, as if a dam had burst, they took off, sharply, swiftly, powerfully. We exceeded every opening expectation, every preliminary estimate, every cautious forecast. The trading floor exploded with jubilation. People were standing up, hugging, slapping each other on the shoulders, on the hands, some even crying. And I knew this wasn't just my victory, this was their moment too. Everything we had worked for together came together in that moment. In that moment, I wasn't just the CEO of a powerful tech company, I was a founder. I was a woman who had turned a dream into a global force, a new economic reality, something that could no longer be ignored. By the time we launched, my stake in the company was worth over $450 million, more than 100 times the value of the trust fund my father had so easily, almost casually, taken from me all those years ago. But that didn't matter anymore. Those numbers weren't about the money. I had created something much bigger, a platform, a system, a team, a belief, and most importantly, I had created myself. After the ceremony, my family came up to me slowly, cautiously, almost as if afraid to approach. Teresa, my older sister, spoke first. All that perfection, all that icy confidence of a corporate lawyer was gone. She was just a woman, my sister, standing before me with shaking hands and a face that for the first time bore no mask, no shield. "Anna, I'm so..." she began and then stopped. "I'm sorry," she said, struggling to get the words out. "You've been trying to explain this whole time and we haven't listened." I looked at her, and there was no anger in me, just understanding and weariness. "Keep it," I said softly. "You all saw what you wanted to see. You didn't want to know. You wanted to be right." My father cleared his throat, and I knew right away that he was trying to find a way to say something important in his own way. "The princess," he said, "asked about the trust fund," but I cut him off without raising my voice. "Keep it. Teresa deserved it as much as I deserved it. And if you want to right the wrongs, start by honoring her journey." I looked around the room at the people who had stood with me when all we had were ideas and coffee and laptops and faith in each other. I looked at Sophia, my co-founder, my mirror, my strength. I looked at our team, the programmers, the analysts, the lawyers, the ones who didn't ask questions when we worked all night in that cramped apartment and simply believed because no one else did. "Sometimes," I said out loud quietly, almost to myself, "the best thing someone can do for you is not believe in you, because when you prove them wrong, the wind blows so much sweeter." "But we're family," my mother said suddenly, barely audible with pain in her voice. "We should have supported you." I nodded slowly, calmly, turning back to those who had truly been my family all this time. "You're right," I said. "We are family, and that's why you're all invited to dinner tonight." I paused. "I've booked a private room at Linen. Arden, I've heard it's the perfect place to celebrate success." I saw my father's face twitch slightly. He remembered that very dinner 5 months ago, when he dismissed my idea as an empty fantasy, a jokey hobby. Only now, instead of sarcasm, there was uncertainty in his gaze, which, oddly enough, gave way to something resembling respect. He managed to portray a slight, almost respectful smile. "We'd be flattered," he said, and those were perhaps the most honest words I'd heard from him in the last 10 years. That night, as the expensive wine flowed and the laughter, loud and hearty, filled the room, I looked at the long table filled with so many different people, my coworkers, my family, investors, even competitors, and thought about how far we'd come. Every night spent coding when everyone assumed I was just playing, every meeting I'd been turned down for, every small victory that had built this moment. My phone vibrated under the table. I pulled it out, glanced at it. It was a text from Sophia. "The stock closed at twice ours projected price. You're officially a billionaire," Sophia wrote. And though the words were dry and businesslike, there was a world hidden inside them. A world I'd burst into not by invitation, not by birthright, but by force of will, through nights of code, days of doubt, and years when no one but me believed it was possible. I glanced across the room at my father, who stood a little to the side, surrounded by his country club friends, men in expensive jackets and with fixed ideas about what success was. He tried to explain to them, awkwardly but with obvious pride, how his daughter, the one he considered frivolous, stubborn and, in her own way, lost, had just built an empire right under his nose, in the city where he had spent his entire career but had never seen anything like it. And then, standing among the flowers, champagne, camera flashes, and congratulations, I understood something important. Success is not about proving others wrong. True success is proving to yourself that you were right, even when the whole world didn't believe it, that you heard your inner voice louder than other people's laughter. Teresa, still in her elegant dress, but without the icy reserve that had been her second skin for so long, pulled me aside. Her voice was quiet, and there was something unusual in it, modesty, sincerity. "Anna," she said, "I need to tell you something. After Mason Williams left my office that day, I started digging. I read everything I could find about it, and I followed every article, studied every deal, every publication. I even started buying stock in every company that had any kind of partnership with your technology partner. I raised an eyebrow. You believed in me? I asked, and there was no mockery in my voice, just a hint of cautious hope. I did, she nodded. Even though I didn't say it, I made enough to pay off the trust fund tenfold. Good, I smiled softly. Because I'm going to need a lawyer I can trust for the next phase of expansion. Someone who understands not only corporate law but technology too, someone who understands code but also family. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she was the girl who used to bring me cookies into my room. Wait, you're offering me a job? I nodded. I'm offering you a chance to be a part of something bigger than the both of us. What do you say, sis? Ready to play with computers? The next morning, I walked into the newly renamed ADJNA Tower. Athena Dynamic Global Neural Analytics, our logo, glowing in the morning sun, crowned the top of the skyscraper. A reminder of how high an idea can go if you give it time and faith. The lobby was bustling with activity, but I moved through it as if walking through a memory. I passed a young intern sitting in the corner, typing code on her laptop during her coffee break, her fingers flying across the keyboard with confidence, her face full of concentration. She looked like I used to, focused, stubborn, confident, no matter what. I stopped next to her, glanced at her screen, then at her. Keep up the good work, I said. Some of the biggest success stories start in the smallest apartments. She looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. I'm Smith, she said, stammering slightly with excitement. I've read all about you, how you built ATNA from scratch. My parents think I'm crazy for choosing programming over law. They say it's just a game. I smiled, nodding slightly. Mine thought so too, and then I left, knowing that their story is their journey and mine is here. I leaned in slightly and added, you have a vision, I'm going to help you make it happen. Hold on to your dream, remember. The people who doubt you today will be reading your story tomorrow. As I rode the elevator up to my office in that shiny new tower, I couldn't help but think about legacy. Not the one my father once wanted me to pass on to him, packaged, tested, secure like a beautifully packed suitcase of someone else's belongings, but the kind that's built step by step, line by line, choice by choice, with no map or compass, just gut instinct and grit. Athena didn't just change the way money flows around the world. She changed the very essence of what it means to be successful. She showed that success doesn't always come in a suit, doesn't always move in a straight line, isn't always endorsed by those who say they know best. Sometimes the most important legacy isn't the one that's passed down. It's the one you create from scratch, with faith, with pain, with love, and with code.